I'd like to first just take a moment to recognize my co-authors that represent external partners and also partners from other offices within the agency. So I was thinking about how I did want to open this, and we've heard about the value of engaging the public over the last day or so. We have heard about the detrimental impacts of urban runoff into urban streams and how that can impact fish populations. We've heard many talks that have incorporated climate change and how that's affecting the world that we live in. All of these things are relevant to this project, but I guess simply put, this talk is about urban conservation and whether or not urban streams can support healthy fish populations. We know that the urban landscape is ever increasing. I don't think that trend is going to change anytime in the near future. And so, as that happens, urbanization presents numerous challenges to aquatic species, some of which include altered flow dynamics, poor water quality, degraded food webs. All of these are characteristics, among others, described by urban stream syndrome, which is a term that was used in this 2005 paper. And if you're interested in learning more about urban stream syndrome, I suggest you take a look at that because they go in depth and talk a lot about it. The fact of the matter is that imperiled fish inhabit urban landscapes. You can walk right down the street to the Willamette River, which supports Chinook salmon, coho salmon, steelhead moving through, as well as all of the urban streams in the Portland area that support those fish along with others such as coastal cutthroat trout, Pacific lamprey, in all of their various life histories, stages, and so because they're there, because we see them in this urban landscape, the value of conserving fish populations is only going to become of greater importance, and it is getting growing recognition. So our question ultimately is, can an urban stream support a healthy fish population? In 2007, there was a coastal cutthroat trout monitoring workshop. One of the statements that came out of that workshop is that healthy populations of coastal cutthroat trout express a range of life history traits and migratory behaviors and have connectivity to other local populations that allows the subspecies to successfully respond to environmental changes over long time periods. For this reason, because of the fact that coastal cutthroat trout are present in the urban environment, it was a species that we are focusing on in Tryon Creek in the city of Portland. This says methods, but truly these are the objectives of the study to evaluate the characteristics of coastal cutthroat trout population in Tryon Creek with respect to ecology, specifically population abundance and density, morphology in terms of life history stages and other parameters, and then behavior in terms of presence of migration and migration timing, genetic health, and of course disease. And we are also comparing these characteristics to non-urbanized populations. So the non-urbanized populations are reference populations, as I'll refer to them from here on, are populations throughout the range of coastal cutthroat trout from California all the way to Alaska. And the subject population is Tryon Creek. And so up here in the corner you see the Columbia River, the mouth of the Columbia River coming down to this big blob, also known as Portland. And then southwest Portland is Tryon Creek, which also is surrounded in part by Tryon Creek State Park. If you look at land use in this watershed, As Kyle just said, green is good, red is bad. The green is public land, and a large portion of the lower part of the watershed is public land that offers a degree of protection for the stream and the species that it supports. As you move outside that green, you get into greater and greater degrees of development, including the I-5 corridor running through the upper portion of the watershed. It's also worth noting that there is a sewage line that runs alongside, underneath at times, Tryon Creek all the way down the corridor to a water treatment plant located at the mouth. The area of interest is between the Highway 43 culvert, just a couple hundred meters upstream of the confluence with the Willamette River, all the way up to Southwest Maple Crest Drive culvert, approximately 3 kilometers above Highway 43. We also have pit tag antennas associated with the Highway 43 culvert and the mouth of the stream. We sampled fish using a backpack electrofisher in 5 years between 2008 and 2015. Only coastal cutthroat trout greater than 100 millimeters were considered in this study, and we collected length and weight, tissue samples for genetic analysis and disease analysis, and implanted pit tags in the abdominal cavity. So this talk, I apologize, is seriously lacking in pictures, so here's one, sampling. And then, of course, working up the fish. So in terms of our objectives and what we're looking at, population abundance and density, a measure of ecology, we estimated abundance on 5 occasions using Lincoln-Peterson multiple pass mark recapture in 3 of those years and a single pass approach in 2 of those years. That abundance estimate was then converted to a density estimate based on fish per meter squared using a sample area that was identified in habitat surveys conducted by ODFW in 2000. For morphology, we looked at condition factor, which was the word I was looking for earlier and forgot. And we also looked at distribution of size classes. For behavior, we looked at migration, assuming fish were attempting to migrate downstream when they passed our antennas. And we monitored that downstream migration behavior for 2 years after 2 tagging events in 2008 and 2013. And here's a picture of one of our antennas near the mouth. And there were a series of these so we could determine which direction fish were moving. Population genetics was conducted by Abernathy Fish Technology Center. They genotyped 14 microsatellite loci among all samples, looking at diversity with measures of heterozygosity and allelic richness, and genetic drift between samples collected in October 2008 and September 2013. The fish pathology was conducted by the Lower Columbia River Fish Health Center. We sampled 35 fish in 2013 for a variety of viruses, parasites, and bacterial pathogens. So moving on to results, just to kind of set you up first, I'll be presenting the results, and then some orange graphics will be coming in. Those orange graphics for these results and the following slides represent the reference populations. Here you see on the x-axis the years, on the y-axis individuals per square meter, and the take-home in terms of fish in Tryon Creek across those years, there's no significant difference in density across the years. When you look at the reference populations and the range of density across the reference populations we analyzed, we saw that Tryon Creek was at the lower end of that range. In terms of condition factor, you've got length versus weight on your axes. Take home here is that there's variability in condition factors among years. If you look at the mean, minimum, and maximum of Tryon Creek in the black, the mean condition factor for the reference population falls right in between there. Size classes across years in Tryon Creek basically represent many different size classes, but are somewhat variable across years. There is contrast to the reference populations, which show a larger degree of smaller individuals, or a larger degree of larger individuals in Tryon Creek is another way of looking at it. This could simply be due to proximity of the reference populations versus Tryon Creek to larger bodies of water. The reference populations tend to be closer to the ocean. In terms of migration behavior, we saw 8%, 7% of fish leaving the stream. This is in contrast to 10% that we saw from reference populations located lower in the Columbia River estuary, more near the Pacific Ocean as well. And in terms of migration behavior, we saw what we typically see with coastal cutthroat trout, which is the largest portion of fish moving out in the spring with a little bump in the fall. This is what we see with reference populations. The timing's a little offset. Again, this could just be because of the difference in where the populations are located geographically. So population genetics, Tryon Creek has similar levels of diversity as non-urbanized populations. So it does not seem to be afflicted by the genetic consequences of small population size, indicating that it may contain a large randomly mating population, which could be diverse and adaptable for long-term persistence. In terms of genetic drift, between 2008 and 2013, there was no evidence of genetic drift, and this is what we would expect to see in a genetically healthy population. For fish pathology, there's no red flags in everything that was looked at, with the possible exception of BKD, where the protein from the causative agent was present, but DNA was not, suggesting cross-reactivity or a false signal, and likely no BKD present. So no evidence for significant disease. Again, this is what we would expect in a healthy population. So overall, the characteristics of coastal cutthroat trout in Tryon Creek are similar to those found in populations in non-urbanized areas with respect to ecology, morphology, behavior, genetic health, and presence of disease. As I pointed out, Tryon Creek did show some differences from reference populations. There was a greater proportion of larger fish, earlier emigration, low end of density range. This could be due to available habitat, sample method, distance from the Pacific Ocean, or some other factor. Ultimately, when it comes to coastal cutthroat trout, there are various life histories, and that can depend on local conditions, which could explain the differences that we're seeing. Finally, our results suggest an urban stream can support a healthy fish population. That's the take-home message. However, it should be noted that Tryon Creek may be an unusual urban stream. It has some protection from surrounding public lands and is supported by multiple conservation programs at the local and state level. But ultimately, Tryon Creek can be an example of an urban watershed that supports a healthy fish population, and the importance of these urban watersheds is only going to become more and more important as the urban landscape ever increases. So I'd like to acknowledge a vast number of partners that we have worked with that have been in Tryon Creek in their various capacities, working to improve the watershed for over a decade. They have done voluminous amounts of hard work without which we would not be able to do our work. And with that, I'd be happy to entertain any questions. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Mike. So you indicated that there are larger fish in Tryon Creek compared to some reference streams. I was wondering if you found any evidence of anadromy in the present population or as a historical reference.
So that is one of the reasons that there is so much interest in Tryon Creek. It's an urban population that's relatively, or an urban stream that's relatively protected. Anecdotally, there is evidence of anadromous fish, steelhead and coho salmon in Tryon Creek. But the culvert at Highway 43 is an 8-foot box culvert that's 400 feet long, a 6% grade, and actually has a turn in it, and you can't even see the other end of it. And that has been a migration barrier for anadromous fish. We have some evidence that juveniles have been able to move up, juvenile anadromous fish, probably taking refuge in Tryon Creek from other parts of the Willamette Basin. But through spawning ground surveys and other efforts, we have not seen any evidence of adult salmonids or Pacific lamprey above that culvert.
Thank you. Just wondering, the Tryon Creek story is pretty exciting, but are there risks about the warm water, southeastern fish fauna kind of moving up into the system? Is that part of the picture at all?
Yeah, so if I understand your question, the risk of warm water species moving up, is that correct?
Yeah, correct.
Yeah, so that is definitely something that we've discussed and have also discussed with the city of Portland. There have been warm water species such as largemouth bass, smallmouth bass, and others collected below the culvert in Tryon Creek. If the culvert comes out, the possibility of those fish moving up is definitely increased. But whether or not that prevents, any action from being taken on improving that culvert, I don't know. I mean, it's kind of, there may need to be a cost-benefit risk analysis conducted, but that has not been done.